Everyone,
Yay.
back to my channel. I'm Paola, and this is Chantel Acevedo. You may remember her from our panel for the Social Distance Book Fest, where we talked about navigating Latinx identity in fantasy. She has a new book coming out, and before I talk about it, I want her to talk about it and to introduce herself.
Thank you, Paola, for having me on. It's so good to see you again. So my book coming out, it's my first book in children's literature. I've written books for adults for years before this, but this is my first foray into kidlit. And so I have it here. I hope that's not too cheesy, but this is Muse Squad, and it's the first in a middle grade fantasy duology. And it tells the story of a girl named Callie who discovers that she is one of the 9 muses. And it's a very diverse group of muses, and of the 9, 4 of them are kids like her, so they're 11-year-old girls like her, and they are tasked with protecting and inspiring other people or other kids who are fated to do good things in the world. And in her case, it's someone from her school who is got a really scientific mind and has some big plans for how to address climate change.
Okay, I loved it. By the way, everyone watching this interview should read it because it's a very wholesome and very honest take on female friendships, especially concerning Callie and her best friend. So definitely check it out. It comes out on July 7th. My first question was, what inspired you to write this novel?
So I have a very specific memory of that inspiration. I was in London with my family. I have 2 girls. And one of them was, taking a restroom break, and I was waiting for her. And in this particular hallway, they have this staircase we're at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And so they have this staircase, and flanked on either side are these busts of muses. And so I was just kind of patiently waiting and looking at one of these statues. And I thought to myself, wouldn't it have been very cool if the muses had been children? Right. And so it was it was like a flashbulb idea. I took out my phone, wrote it down in notes. And once I got home, I started working on it. I think it's the only time I've ever had an idea like that, like just sort of out of the blue, out of nowhere. And the whole thing sort of came to me at once. And so I feel like it was Muse inspired. And I was at a museum looking at a muse. So but that's specifically where the idea came from. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. The other question that I wanted to ask you was, what was the most challenging part about switching from your target audience from adult readers to middle grade readers?
Yeah, so actually, I'd been reading children's lit always. Like I never stopped reading it. And it was sort of my pleasure to read those books. And in particular, I read a lot of YA. I teach creative writing at the University of Miami, and we don't have a children's lit focus. And so it wasn't something that I was doing to teach. It was just something that these were books I read because I loved them, and I had always loved them. And so I always wanted to write for children, and I had tried writing in a YA voice. But I've been wanting to write in the YA space for a long time, and I just couldn't nail the voice. And it's a very specific YA voice. And I just, kept trying and couldn't quite get a hold of it. And it was that when I had this sort of flashbulb idea, that idea immediately, I knew that wasn't a YA idea, because it's very sort of fantasy, but again, you said sort of innocent, and there's a kind of innocence, to that idea. And so I said, well, this is maybe a middle grade book. And so when I started writing in the middle grade voice, that clicked immediately. And I think part of it is because I had a middle grade age daughter at home too. And so her voice was in my head, and her friends' voices were in my head as well. But I found a kind of a resonance with that voice. So the struggle, I think, wasn't necessarily this particular book, but in stepping into the kidlit space, and how to do that in a way that was good. And I didn't want to write something bad. And so it took me years, really, I think, to figure out that YA wasn't for me, that it was this other voice.
Okay, so another thing that really spoke to me about your book and what it says on Goodreads in general is that it doesn't have like a comparison. Sometimes when, I don't know who is in charge of this in publishing, but sometimes when they market some books, they compare one book to another, like perfect for fans of blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was reading the book, I was like, oh, this is kind of like, wait, no, it's not like that at all, or has a very interesting twist to it. So what was your approach, and how did you manage to make it so unique?
Well, thank you for that. I didn't purposely think, well, this has to be 100% unique, and let me make sure that if it's anything like something else, I tick it off, right? I wasn't sort of actively doing that. And in terms of sort of comps, I didn't come up with any for myself when I was, submitting it to my agent, or when she submitted it. They came up with their own. I think they did sort of reference Percy Jackson and Arusha as sort of books that deal with mythology. But I think part of what makes it maybe unique is setting makes it unique. There aren't that many books set in Miami from a Cuban-American perspective. And so that once you sort of decide on this is a particular setting for this book, some parameters come up around it, right? There are certain things that would be logical, right, for that story. And so I think once you start getting really specific in that way, and you honor that specificity of that culture and time and all of that, it starts to distinguish itself from other things, right? And so I think, setting is probably one of the key reasons why it is distinctive in that way.
Yeah, and I also think it's very distinct in the sense that it has a lot of nationalities included. It's not just like the American or the Cuban-American muses. It's you got English muses, you got muses from India and from all over the country as well, not just Miami. So that's part of why it's so refreshing to see such an interesting take on Greek myth, and how like you said in your article about how the muse inspires everyone to tell their own story.
That was fun to do too, and thinking of them a little bit as a kind of a Justice League, right? Like they're like from everywhere, and if they're this group that has always existed and they're always getting new members and they're sort of refreshing their ranks, they would be global. They would have to be global, right? So the muses would have to be from everywhere.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting way to incorporate everything. I think that it's like genius to do it, because it wasn't overwhelming, like, oh, I have to remember who's from where and what it does. It's more like, this is what happens, this is global, and everyone is welcome in the Muse Squad. So excellent. I loved it.
Oh, thank you.
Anyway, so family and secrets, I noticed, are like a very recurring thing in your books. So how do you incorporate them so seamlessly, and how do you manage to keep the reader interested in those secrets?
So it's hard to do as a writer. I think whenever you introduce a secret or a mystery into a story, you run the danger of making it too obvious to the reader, or making it too obscure for the reader, or painting yourself into a terrible corner, which I feel like I have one of my adult books, which I love and is a very personal book, also to me feels flawed in that way. And I remember the struggle in writing that book. It's A Falling Star, which was my second novel, and there was a big mystery at the heart of it, and it was maybe the hardest thing I've ever had to write. And I think the mistake I made was that I didn't know the ending of that book. I mean, I kind of knew the ending of that book, but I didn't like firmly know it. And so I just started writing forward in that way, and wrote myself into all kinds of traps, And so one of the things that I've learned is that particularly if there's a mystery or a secret, you have to know it, and then you have to work backwards out of it, And that was a hard lesson learned, because that book, was hard. and so now I try not to write a book, even begin writing, unless I know how it ends, and specifically how it ends. And so that's I think one of that's just like a nuts and bolts, tip for writers, which is sort of just really know the story so that you can keep the reader surprised and engaged. And so you throw red herrings out at them, right? And so you're reading the book and you think that's the bad person. And then you realize, oh no, it's not that person, right? It's someone else. And it's an old trick, right? It's what Sherlock Holmes did. Or Arthur Conan Doyle, right? Did for Sherlock Holmes. It's throwing up those red herrings, right? And the reader kind of sniffs them out and then surprises them that way. So those are all sort of techniques that I learned, from reading, good YA and good middle grade and good mystery books.
That's really good advice, like what you did with with particularly Muse Squad, that we are sort of introduced into the mystery of how and why Callie is a muse, not get sort of, I don't know like what word to use, but not to get bored with finding out why or finding out where she got it, or
Mhm.
her own journey into becoming and staying a muse, because it seems like she's kind of like resistant to being a muse. She doesn't really
Mhm.
want to be a muse.
There's a line I wrote in the story, which it's something I say to my kids, but it was always not said to me explicitly, but sort of inferred in with, you know, by my mom when I was growing up, which is that you don't have to say yes to anything right away,
Mhm.
and that no is a complete sentence, right? Like that kind of sort of affirming of your own, affirming of your own sort of fate, right? Like
Mhm.
that you can sort of, you can control that, right? And to some degree by the choices that you make. And so I gave that to Callie too. She gets this advice from her mother, knows a complete sentence. You don't have to commit to anything right away. Sort of take your time before you make a choice. And I think that's just generally good advice. You know, she
Mhm.
doesn't, she's presented with these phenomenal powers and she's like, do I want them though?
Yeah, that's
You know?
another thing that I think makes
Yeah.
the story very unique. So moving on to like the friendship aspects, which is like my favorite part of the book. So how did you manage to make like the insecurities and the jealousy so believable, to the point that it's not necessarily making Callie an unlikable person? She just wanted her best friend back.
Yeah. So in the early in the novel, very early in the novel, she, when she first discovers her powers, it's because she accidentally turns her best friend into a pop star, right?
Mm.
Accidentally inspires her to this kind of, you know, thing, and sort of gives her these gifts, right? These magical gifts, right? And so at first she's very excited for her friend, but then starts to think, wait a minute, like I'm losing my friend here, you know? For me, those, a lot of those feelings, it was easy to tap into those feelings, to remember what that was like in middle school. Like my middle grade memories are actually really vibrant.
Mhm.
And I happened to have at the time, my, you know, my best friend through elementary, middle school was also the most popular girl at school. Like she was
Mm.
it. She was it, you know? And like when you're not it, like you love your best friend and you want all the great things for them, but after some time it starts to really wear on you, you know. And I
Mm.
remember when we, you know, first started, you know, like eighth and ninth grade, and you know, we would go to the mall, and you know, people would give her all this attention, you know, and especially like, you know, I live in a primarily like Latinx community, and like all the piropos, you know,
Mm.
all the like, oh mamita, like that kind of stuff, which is
Yeah.
gross. But when
Mhm.
you're also an eighth grader and you don't, and you know, like your best friend's getting all this attention and you're not getting any, right? It
Mhm.
starts to like really wear on you, and affect your confidence and your self-esteem, and all of that, you know. And so I was able to really tap into those feelings, because I just remember them so vividly, like of having
Mhm.
this kind of standout best friend, and feeling a little bit like her sidekick.
Mhm.
And so Callie starts to feel like a sidekick, you know, in many ways, and neglected by her friend. And so she's got to work through those feelings, because she still loves her friend, you know, but
Yeah.
she needs to learn to love herself too. And that was the hard part, you know, like, and I think part of that challenge, sort of that challenge that I had as a kid growing up, was a lack of self-esteem, right? I didn't
Mhm.
love myself enough, you know, and so that was what was caused, that's what was causing a lot of that conflict. For me, that kind of, I'm glad that you picked that out, because that is kind of like the deepest, you know, part of the book for me, and it's where it digs
Mhm.
deepest into my own personal life. It gets to kind of a core
Mhm.
thing that I struggled with. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just about Callie not wanting her, or not necessarily not wanting her best friend to get attention, but it's not just about Callie being jealous of the attention. She also has a lot of body image issues.
Mm-hmm.
Her own sort of head and her own mindset gets in the way of approaching that those insecurities
Yeah.
in a productive way, which is weird for me to say because she's 11 years old, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a very real thing, and that it
Yeah.
speaks to everyone. It's not just for 11-year-olds. Not only 11-year-olds feel jealous because of their friends are getting more attention, it's everyone. And sometimes we don't know how to navigate those feelings, and that's when the friendship is affected, and sometimes it even irreparable.
Right. Right. And it's not, what I tried to reflect in the book is that sort of coming out of that, right, and learning the lessons you need to learn to love yourself, right, to accept yourself, but not just accept yourself, but love yourself, that they're not sort of instant and that there's no magic that can fix it, right? Like that's an internal journey. And so for Callie, she struggles with this sort of throughout the novel, and it's only until the very end when she's presented with an option, like you can fix everything, and then she knows that she shouldn't, right? Like that's actually not the point, right? But it takes an entire book to figure that out, for herself, and again, like I have, at the time that I was writing a book, my daughter was in middle grade. All my little cousins were also middle grade. There's like a whole squad in my family of girls who are this age, and talking to them all, and they were all struggling with this kind of stuff. Just all struggling with, and you talk to them, you try to give them confidence and pep talks and help them think through these problems, but you also know it's not a magic pill that you're giving them, that they have to also figure it out, for themselves.
Speaking on that sort of advice that you give your daughters and your cousins and your nieces, do you have any specific advice for middle grade writers?
Oh yes, I do. I mean, I just said that, so like, oh yes, I do. I think why I said that so with so much emotion is because I'm teaching a YA and middle grade class in the fall, so I'm very excited about our majors taking that class. But I think some of the things that I would urge them to do is, one, to read a lot in the age that they're interested in, and also the genre, because we sometimes will say, well, kid lit is a genre, and it's not, right? It's an age group, and then it has genres within it, right? So if you're interested in middle grade fantasy, read a lot of middle grade fantasy. So yeah, so the advice I would say is not to lecture middle grade kids, that they're at that age where they don't want it, and they've just realize that they don't want it. And so while most middle grade books have some kind of lesson or heart to them, I think that should happen pretty naturally. That's the sort of that core beating heart of the story anyway, which any writer needs to be thinking about. But it's primarily about giving them a good story and something engaging to read. So I would say don't come in with the moral of the tale, which sometimes could be the temptation, for writing for this age group. They don't want it, and trust me, it'll be in there and they will pick up on it. Yeah.
I love that advice because it is true. Kids are very smart, like you just said. Kids know when you're trying to teach them a specific thing, and kids will know the message if you trust them enough. Who are you exactly writing to with this book?
Well, to some degree, I think with everything you kind of write to yourself, right? Because you have your own barometer of what you think is a good story and what entertains you. And if you're not entertained, then you're never going to finish the book because you become bored. I think to a great extent too, I was writing, for my kids and my cousins, who like these kinds of stories, so they, I was writing for them too. And then I think also writing for kids who might not see themselves represented in books, especially as sort of the heroes or helpers to the heroes, which is what the Muses are. They're helpers, and particularly not set in Miami, right? So there aren't very many fantasy novels, set in Miami for middle grade kids. And that reflect that Cuban-American experience, right? That reflect what our schools look like. What do our public schools look like? What does it mean to be a kid, in this environment? And one of the things that was very gratifying to me, and I think I said this in the social distancing book fest, was that when my daughter read it, she said, wow, this is so relevant, and she actually wondered if I had borrowed some of her friends' names, which I hadn't, but I had, we name our kids and what these schools sound like. She, at one point I even used a teacher's name that was actually a teacher at her school. I didn't know that. And she's like, oh, you have to change it because my teacher will think it's about her. So for me, that was very gratifying, that she, I know she's so embarrassed, that she got to read a book that just seems like her school experience and her friends' experience and her own experience. And so it's for them specifically too. So I hope a lot of Miami kids get to read the book as well.
Yeah, it's a very interesting take on myth, while also you talked about this as well in the social distancing book fest. It's not just about the Greek myth, it's also about how Callie is Catholic. She grew up in the Cuban-American household. She has her siblings. Her parents are divorced. Everything that sort of contributes to Callie's personality and experiences are also very palpable in the book, and it's not just like they suddenly go away because she's a muse.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that was very purposeful, right? Like her life, just because she's gotten these, these gifts doesn't mean that now everything is upside down. You know what I mean? Like, or that everything has changed, or that whatever problems that she had have been swept away, right? She's also a child who's grieving, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's grieving a beloved aunt. And like you said, she's the divorce is fresh, right, in her family's story. And so she's sort of dealing with that as well. As for her faith, she's, I think, typical of many, Cuban Catholics who are culturally, Catholic, but don't practice that much except for like the Primera Comunión picture and the, and they do, and then, they hit those benchmarks. And so she's like that too. And all of that sort of makes up who she is, right? And creates some kind of narrative pressures on her life too, which I think is important for a character, right? There are things too that you have to sort of face and deal with, like that divorce and like her grief, and she has to learn to live with these things. And so I didn't want her to sort of strip away all of the other things that make her like a real human, right? And trade that for magic, right? She can have both of these things.
I don't know how to explain it, but it's just so genius the way that you do it, because it's not like in your face, like Callie is going through a difficult time, you should be mindful of that. No, it's just like, oh, this is happening and it's affecting her. And it's a thing that happens and it's not in your face, which is something that's very, very valuable, like you said, about not trying to preach to kids. Would you like to talk about any upcoming projects before we finish off?
Yeah, well, I'm working now on the edits for the second Muse Squad. So it's a duology, and I saw the cover and it's beautiful. I know, I'm excited.
Oh my gosh.
I'm excited. And the second one is primarily set in New York.
Oh.
It's set in Queens primarily because her dad lives in Queens, and so she's going to go stay with her dad for the summer, and so Muse hijinks follow her there. And there's another in the same way that the myth of Cassandra becomes sort of central in the first one. There's another myth, which I won't reveal, but becomes very central in the second one as well. And we wrap up Callie's story, I think, in a nice way. So I'm excited for that.
Exciting. Yeah. I love that we changed settings. I love that it's about her relationship with her dad, which is a very interesting relationship we explored in the first book. And lastly, if you were part of the Muse Squad, what muse do you think you would be?
Oh, this is a good question. And I think I would probably be what Callie is, which is the muse of the epic poem. One, because I was just an English major and I was always like that kid, right? It was always my favorite subject, and I would have loved it. I think what makes Callie a little bit different is that when she first learns that she's the muse of the epic poem, she doesn't understand what that even means, right? Because she's not like, like a school A+, kind of nerd, like she's, like just an average student, and she's like, I don't even know what an epic poem is. And then she comes to learn that the epic poems, right, the writers of, the Odyssey and the Iliad and all of these great stories are actually hero makers, right? These are the hero makers. And so she has an important role. But I would probably be like the bookish epic poem muse. I would be like, right, everybody write. Let me give you a prompt, like that would be what I would run around doing. So I'd probably be less exciting than Callie. But that I think she's my favorite.
Yeah, but that's really fitting because you are a writing teacher. You've been writing for a while now. And I'm so excited about the second installment for Muse, but I was not expecting to love the book as much as I did. I was very excited to check it out and to read it. I was like, oh, this sounds like a fun ride. I love Greek myth. I love Latinx books. It's going to be exciting. And then it just swept me off my feet. It was the most wholesome, honest thing that I've ever read. And I love that it mixes very well with the Greek myth. Any finishing thoughts on Muse Squad, on anything else you want to touch on?
Oh gosh. No, I think you covered it. I think you've been so supportive you know, from the beginning and kind and like just cheering the book on. So I'm really grateful for it. And I hope that the book finds many readers like you, and that it has a long shelf life, and that, you know, people get some joy out of it. Yeah.
I hope so too. I will be hyping it up until the next one comes out. And when the next one comes out, I will be hyping up that one too. It's just a very, very beautiful story. I know I keep saying that, but it's true. It's a really good book. So
Thank you.
everyone watching this, please check it out as soon as it
Thank
comes
you.
out. It comes out on July 7th. I will leave links in the description below for Chantel's socials, her Instagram, her Twitter, the Goodreads page, so you can add Muse Squad to your want to read category. An article that I just finished reading called Why Diverse Children's Books Matter, that she wrote on Shelf Stuff. Don't forget to pre-order Muse Squad and buy it as soon as it comes out. And yeah, thank you so much, Chantel, for doing this again with me. I was very excited.
Thank you.
And I hope to read the second Muse Squad book and all your other books soon enough.
Thank you, Paola. Thank you so much.